cause, other like-minded organizations and individuals, getting them engaged on some of these issues. Just as an example, we've got over 900,000 veterans just here in Ohio alone. If you add just one family member to that, you're looking at almost 2 million individuals. And that's not including, you know, aunts and uncles and cousins and extended military families. If we get even a portion of those engaged on some of these issues nationwide, that is a huge voice. But unfortunately, up to this point, it's a voice that hasn't been heard to the fullest extent. And so that's just a little bit about you know, what we are as an organization and what we're trying to accomplish. So as I said, you know, we're not just focused on veterans issues, we're not just focused inward. But one of the issues that we have focused on that may seem like just a veterans issue is reform at the Department of Veterans Affairs. You can't hardly turn on your television or open a newspaper or check a news site online without seeing some sort of headline about recent scandals at this VA facility or this Department of Veterans Affairs facility over here. It's really been in the news lately. There's been scandal after scandal. They're finding out new information, and it's really becoming an issue. But one of the things that we try and talk about is this isn't just a veterans issue. Okay, there are many facets to this, and I'll go into that a little bit as we go on. One of the important things to think about and to consider is that the Department of Veterans Affairs is a prime example of government-run healthcare.
You're not kidding.
And if you want to know what Obamacare looks like, ask a veteran who has been engulfed in a sea of bureaucracy, bureaucratic hurdles, just to get to basic care. And so this isn't just a veterans issue. This is everyone's issue. And do not be mistaken. This is not an issue that they're not just trying to divert to another issue, that they're not trying to distract us from VA scandals just because they're trying to distract us from VA scandals. They're trying to distract us because at the core is this principle that veterans have been experiencing government-run healthcare. Veterans have been experiencing a single-payer healthcare system for decades. And it is not working at all. And when you think about it, we're just talking about a very small percentage of the American population. And if it is overwhelmed and burdened down by just a few percentage of the population, what does this look like when this becomes a grand scheme of a thing for the general population? If this is what we have right now, what does that look like years down the road? So, we're not just talking about veterans issues, we're talking about American issues. The important piece of our name isn't concerned veterans. The important piece of our name is for America. We're veterans, we're military families, we're patriotic Americans, we're supporters of all stripes for America. So tonight I'm going to talk a little bit more about the VA scandals. Maybe some of this you've heard, maybe some of this you haven't heard, but maybe, hopefully by the end of this, I'll be able to give you a little bit of context of what's going on, but also to give us a plan of action. What can we do for this? What are the next steps to make reform possible, to make some of these issues better for this generation of veterans and also moving forward? Long story short, the Department of Veterans Affairs is failing America's veterans. As I said, you can't even turn on the TV, you can't even look at a headline without seeing that recently. For too long, veterans of all generations and their families have been underserved, overburdened, and flat out ignored by an unaccountable bureaucracy. One example is veterans who submit claims for battlefield injuries, and then they wait years for that claim to be resolved. Another example is veterans who seek just basic medical diagnosis and then wait weeks or even months. And in the most tragic cases, veterans are given substandard care and lose their lives in VA facilities. Now, families, along with their veterans, share the burden of these bureaucratic failures. What I think personally is most infuriating is that the executives and managers responsible for these delays, and deaths, they've not been fired. Instead, they've actually been given performance bonuses. And this isn't just a one-time thing. This isn't just Phoenix. This isn't just one of these scandals that we've seen. This is systemic. So one of the issues at the VA is that there's no accountability. When congressional committees and advocacy organizations seek answers, the VA stonewalls them. They don't answer those investigations, and they refuse to answer any sort of critical questions. So another issue at the VA is that there's no transparency. And when veterans seek other avenues of care, when they've been waiting too long, or when they've received substandard care, realistically they don't have any other option. Because, third, there's no flexibility at the VA. One thing to be clear on, though, is this isn't an issue of resources. The VA's funding has increased by 60% since 2009, from $98 billion to over $160 billion. And Congress has funded nearly every department priority over that time. Long story short, when the VA asks for money for whatever reason, it's given almost without question. A lot of times that money is used to expand programs, to implement new priorities, to implement new programs. But we believe that the VA and the Congress that funds them should not make any new promises until it keeps the promises it has already made. And we've seen over and over and over again that those promises are not being made. As I said, one of the most prime examples of recent is the Phoenix VA scandal. Now, just really quickly, if you're not familiar with what happened at Phoenix, over 40 veterans died preventable deaths because they were on a secret waiting list and they weren't judged against the standards on the main waiting list. So what happens is the VA has certain standards that they have got to uphold. They've got to have veterans getting care in a timely manner. But what they were doing, and what we've seen is that many other VA facilities are doing this, and similar practices, is that they kept a secret waiting list. They said, oh, well, these 150 veterans, or whatever the number is, we can't get to them in the standard time frame. So we're just going to wait and wait and wait and wait and wait. And then when there comes a slot on the real waiting list, we'll put them on there. Within 2 weeks, they get an appointment, and we look like we're doing awesome. Now, once again, this isn't just Phoenix. There are up to 100 VA facilities right now that are under investigation for similar gaming practices or other issues. Now, we don't know the exact number because many of these investigations are done secretly. They are not, obviously a VA facility is not supposed to know that they're being investigated, or else they'll clean up some things or scrub some quote-unquote secret lists. A couple weeks ago, actually a month after the VA in Phoenix, after that scandal erupted, a month after that, President Obama had a press conference. Now, it says something when it took him a month to address some of these issues. Also, these are some of the issues that we've been dealing with, similar issues for the past 2.5 years. But it took something like Phoenix, and it took something like this kind of this level to bring this out in the open. But it took him a month to have a press conference. He said this: "When I hear allegations of misconduct, I will not stand for it. None of us should." Obama added, "If these allegations prove to be true, it is dishonorable, it is disgraceful, I will not tolerate it, period." The former Secretary of the Department of Veterans Affairs, he has since resigned, and President Obama accepted that resignation. He testified before the Senate shortly after the Phoenix scandal. Apparently, there was an internal memo that was sent out years ago, 4 or 5 years ago. It was sent out throughout the VA, 8 pages long, that talked about, this paraphrasing, this is basically what it said. And this came out in this Senate hearing where the former secretary testified. The memo basically said this: here are some known scheduling, gaming, illegitimate practices done to make facilities look better, to make it look like they're meeting their standards. And it gave an entire list of known practices. And it said, if we find any facility, any employee, any manager who is engaging in these type of illegitimate practices, they will be held accountable. When the former secretary testified before the Senate, he'd never heard of this memo. His colleague, who was also there testifying, had heard of the memo, and it was brought before the Senate, but he'd never heard of it. The common denominator here is that President Obama says, if we find out there's an issue, when we hear there's an issue, if and when, the same type of thing that the former Secretary Shinseki said was, when he was asked, what type of specific examples can you give of people being held accountable for these known gaming practices years and years ago, he could not offer a single instance. And so the common denominator here is passing the buck and underestimating, shuffling answers around, and never really having any sort of accountability. As I said, it's not if there's an issue, there is an issue, and up to 100 VA facilities are currently under investigation. In that same press conference, President Obama then followed up with a list of ways that the VA has bettered veterans' lives, has bettered veterans and military families, their lives and their well-being. And one of the issues that he talked about was the disability backlog, and how over the past year and a half, it's actually been slashed in half. Now, if you're not familiar, at the beginning of January 2013, January 2013, there were 600,000 claims in the disability claims backlog, which means they've been waiting up to 6 months. 600,000 claims. Now, he is correct. That number has been slashed in half, because as of recently, that number just got under 300,000. But what is not told, the other half of this story, is that, and we have kept track of this, is that the disability claims backlog has been decreasing, and it looks like more and more claims are being processed, but the appeals backlog has been on a steady increase. And in fact, it has almost reached the point where there are more in the appeals backlog than there are in the claims backlog. What this means is that yes, it's been slashed in half, it's went down over the past year. More and more claims are being processed, but more and more claims are being processed incorrectly. A recent article stated, the American Legion challenged the accuracy of online statistics from VA's Monday morning reports, claiming they were not consistent with the Legion's review of recently adjudicated claims. Of 260 claims examined, 55% contained errors. And this statistic is in stark contrast to the approximate 90% accuracy rating indicated by the VA. So the VA says we have a 90% accuracy rating, but in reality, it's more like 50 to 55%. And this explains why the appeals backlog is increasing. So people want to focus on the disability claims backlog decreasing, and there are less and less people waiting a year or 2 years to get their claim initially processed. But there are more and more and more veterans in the appeals backlog, which they are waiting up to 5, 6, 7 years to get finally processed. In addition to this, every day 22 veterans 22 veterans commit suicide. And yet, at least a third of veterans have to wait at least 2 weeks before getting a routine mental health checkup. They're waiting for diagnosis. They're waiting for routine mental health checkups. They're waiting, they're waiting, they're waiting. And it's all at the beck and call of bureaucrats who can't be fired, who are given unearned performance bonuses. Their lives are literally at the hands of these bureaucrats. These decisions that they are making on who's getting care, who's not getting care, who's going to be on a secret waiting list, who's going to be on the accurate waiting list. These decisions are literally life and death when it comes to our veterans seeking care. Inconsistency, lack of accountability, and blatant mismanagement is what we're seeing in the VA. And from recent headlines, it is obvious that these type of decisions can kill. Now, obviously, not all VA facilities, not all programs, not all employees are failing. There are many great hospitals, there are many great doctors, there are some fantastic facilities. And I've talked to many veterans, never had an issue at the VA. But unfortunately, these bright spots are the exception and not the rule. Overall, we've been tracking this since our inception as an organization. The VA overall is a calcified bureaucracy, unable to meet even the most basic needs of our veterans. And they respond by denying problems, by stonewalling inquiries, and finding quick fixes to distract the media and to distract watchdog groups like ours. So what do we do? What is the next step? Since January, we were endorsing a bill called the VA Management Accountability Act. Simply put, very short bill, about 3 pages, would allow the VA secretary to fire poorly performing managers. Imagine that. That's it. You're expecting more. That's it. That's what it does. But the fact of the matter is that we've seen, as I said, a calcified bureaucracy, a bureaucracy that has a culture of apathy. It has a culture of nonchalance. It has a culture of bonuses are given for things other than performance. Bonuses are given for this reason or that reason, and it really is not tied to our veterans actually getting care. And so what this bill would do is it would literally just flip the VA on its head and be able to say, okay, poorly performing employees can be fired, but we're also, on the flip side of that, going to be able, for the first time ever, to empower good employees. So long story short, we were pushing and pushing and pushing for this bill. We had tens of thousands of veterans and military families getting involved, making phone calls, writing letters. We sent veterans, even here in Ohio, to Washington to have face-to-face meetings in Washington. We've done face-to-face meetings here in Ohio and other states with members of Congress, and pushing and pushing and pushing. Now, when the bill went up for a vote, it passed overwhelmingly, 390 to 33. The following week, actually I believe it was that week, it was blocked by Senate leadership and was not allowed to be put up for a vote. So then, what we did is we pushed and pushed and pushed and pushed, and we would bomb Harry Reid's inbox and bomb Senator Bernie Sanders' inbox and push and push and push some more to say you need to let this go up for a vote. Why is it makes no sense. What we would say is it's a true dichotomy. Are you on the side of our veterans who are being underserved, or are you on the side of bureaucrats who can't be fired for not doing their jobs? It's a simple choice, and unfortunately, there were some people in Senate leadership who were making that choice. So that bill, nothing ever happened to it. But continuing to push and push and push and push. A few weeks ago, there was a historic deal struck by, believe it or not, Senator Bernie Sanders and Senator John McCain. And they basically took the existing text of 3 bills and put it into one. As I mentioned earlier, there are three issues. There are many issues, but there are 3 main issues that we see with the VA. Lack of flexibility, lack of choice. There's lack of accountability, and there's no transparency. This bill, the quote-unquote compromise bill, is actually a fantastic deal, but it brought in the text of these three bills, one of which we were specifically emphasizing. We thought that we would have to deal with those 3 issues separately on 3 separate bills. They put them all together, and this bill is called the Veterans Access to Health Care Through Choice, Transparency, and Accountability Act. So it brought in those 3 things, those 3 main measures where we see that the VA is failing and having issues. So that bill, the sister bill in the House, passed unanimously. A couple days later, it passed in the Senate. Now they're going to convene the bills, and make no mistake, our organization is not going to stop running. Our organization is not going to stop pushing. The last thing that we want to happen, and we've already seen it try to happen, is for people who are uncomfortable with some of the stark language in the bill, that they might want to water down the accountability aspect of it, all right? Or water down the choice aspect of it. We're going to be there. We're going to continue pushing. Us, as well as other patriots all across the country, just like ourselves in this room, are going to continue pushing and making sure that our representatives are representing us, not as veterans, but as Americans, and that they are doing the right thing. For too long, the right thing to do has been the hard thing to do. The wrong thing to do has been the easy thing to do. There's all sorts of special interest groups that are pushing our representatives to go against our best interests. But for once, we're going to stand up, and we're going to say we're going to make sure that the right thing to do is the easy thing to do. And until you do that right thing, we're not going to let up. So we're going to make sure that as this bill convenes into one solid bill and it gets sent to the President, that it is not watered down, it is not pushed to the side, it's not stuck in a committee for its death sentence. We're going to make sure that this continues to go on. Now, there's 2 aspects of this that I really want you to grasp, just in case you haven't grasped it. First of all, I alluded to a couple weeks ago we had a big event in Cleveland. When our CEO stood up, and this is before this bill had been passed in either house, our CEO stood up and said that this deal has been struck, and that any veteran who has been waiting longer than, I believe, 30 days, or lives 40 miles away from a VA facility can have access to private care. The room erupted. 350 people, most of which are veterans and military families, erupted in applause. Because this is a reform that's been a long time coming. It has been a reform that has been needed, and veterans like myself and like others in this room know that it is needed. So that's the first half of that. We as veterans know that this has been an issue, and we know that it needs to be dealt with. And there was just overwhelmingly applause. Like, even if it means nothing to you, understand that this is huge. The second half of this, I alluded to Obamacare earlier. I alluded to how that looks with government-run health care. Picture this. In a very short time period, very, very soon, when this bill all goes through the wash and we've been over there, looking over their shoulder, making sure that the right reforms are in there, making sure that they're not adding pork to it. When this goes through the wash and it finally sits on President Obama's desk, as I said, we're not going to stop there. We're going to be pressuring him and pressuring him and pressuring him, forcing him to make that tough decision. Just picture this. This president, this administration, will be forced to sign into law a bill that privatizes the only single-payer health care system that we currently have in America. We're going to talk about not just being a veterans issue. This is not a veterans issue. There have been many veterans that I've talked to that have worried about the expanding budget, the expanding nature of the VA healthcare system. What does this look like 5 or 10 years down the road if this budget continues to increase, if Obamacare does fall flat on its face, and where do we turn to next? This bill forces him to privatize the only single-payer healthcare system that we have, and prevents that from going any further. Prevents the bureaucratic side of it to actually do their job, and forces those who are responsible for preventable veteran deaths to be fired, to be held accountable for their actions for the first time in their history. This is what Concerned Veterans for America is about. We are about, doesn't matter what side of the aisle is in the majority in Congress. Doesn't matter what side of the aisle is in the White House. We are going to put pressure where it hurts, and we're going to make sure that through the help of veterans and those like-minded individuals all across the country who choose to link arms with us to make a positive change in the direction of our country, that we have the power and the voice to finally speak up and continue to get back to where we know our country should be. So it doesn't matter which side of the aisle they're on. We are a non-profit, non-partisan organization. But we're going to make the easy thing to do the right thing to do. No longer is it going to be everyone else's voice that is speaking into what our representatives should do. It's going to be us, we the people, as Americans, as veterans, as military families, as supporters of all stripes. We're going to be the ones that are holding our elected officials accountable. And that's what we're about. That's what we do at Concerned Veterans for America. So, I'll open it up to any questions if we have any. So. Yes?
I have a question. I'm a Blue Star mother, and I tried to get our Blue Star Mothers organization to get in contact with you, and they said, well, we're absolutely, that your organization is too political. Is there some way that you could get in touch with the president of the Blue Stars in Ohio and talk with them? Because I don't think that you're too political, and of all people who should be concerned about this, it would be the families of veterans.
Yeah.
And so it just, because I tried, I belong to the Buckeye Chapter 26, and Pat Pell is the president of that, and she kind of said, well, I can give the members information, but we can't have you come and speak then. So I was just wondering if there was some way you could reach out to them and explain that you're not partisan and you're nonprofit.
Yeah, absolutely. Any contact information, any invitation to speak, we will be, we'll be there. But it's interesting, though, that the current political climate has made nonpartisan issues partisan issues.
Yes, right.
When we're talking about preventable veterans deaths, that's not a partisan issue.
Right.
This is not a matter of Republican, Democrat, whatever the case may be. It's an issue of our veterans. It's an issue of fulfilling the promises that we made long ago. And so it's interesting. There are more people than you would believe that have that same mindset. We're too partisan. We're too this or we're too that. But these issues shouldn't be partisan issues. It's good.
Yeah, I've got a question. It's going to be a little long-winded, so be patient with me. I had a father-in-law who was a veteran. He was in the Madison Veterans Hospital. He was sick, and we were visiting with him. He was pretty sick. And the care that I observed there, I was very concerned with. So I asked for a staff meeting because of the concern they had. And what was happening is they were rotating doctors, and each doctor would come in, decide to change his care, and so he would, within a period of a couple of days, he would go through 2 or 3 different variations on how they were treating him. Ultimately, they killed him. He died. I was very upset about what I saw there. It was just an attitude within the hospital. Recently, there's a gentleman by the name of Mr. Mapes who happens to live on Mayfield Road. He has a thing that he does where he puts together plaques for veterans. He goes out and distributes these all over the place. And so he was recently in, and he does this, he goes on a road trip. He does hundreds of these things. And he goes out and goes through VA hospitals and he tries to hand them out. Recently, the VA hospitals have prevented him from being able to go into the hospital to approach veterans to hand out these plaques, thanking them for their service. So, all of that said, to ask this question, it appears there's an attitude amongst the bureaucrats that are running these hospitals, which is I hate to say it, I don't know how else to word it, but almost anti-military, or accountability, whatever. What is being done, or what is the conversation around how to bring more accountable administration to these hospitals?
Yeah, I mean, it's the same basic principle from the top all the way down to just your average manager at a local facility. It's the same issue. I mean, I've heard story after story after story of an individual that said, whatever, I can't be fired. I'll be at my desk. I might do a little work here and there, but I'll do my 30 years and retire. It's an issue at the local level. It's an issue all the way to the top. So I mean, it's definitely a concern. But part of the issue has been that it's not even possible for any of those individuals to be fired, for there to be any accountability. As I said, there are some decent hospitals. I was talking to someone who works at a VA facility, and they said there's 2 types of people that work at a VA facility: those that are there for the veterans, and those that are there despite the fact that there are veterans there. And it's true, and it seems like that's kind of the mentality that you've run into. On a local level, I don't know what the answer is, except that as I said, it's systemic. It's throughout the culture. I mean, it is a difficult.
Who oversees this? Is this Congress? Do we go to Congress and have them change the funding structure, or change to create a, what is the approach?
It's a federal issue, so most of it's through Congress. But going back to the transparency, we talked. I mentioned, this hearing with, the former now Secretary of the VA, Eric Shinseki, and they'll do, it's the same type of thing we talked about earlier with the, the request for information. You're mentioning it, but the request for information, and it's there's no transparency. There's no even Congress, I think it's finally getting to the point where they're sort of starting to care, because there's been a little bit more action in Congress, but there's power there, but there's still issues as far as, I mean, it is I cannot emphasize how much of a gigantic bureaucracy this. It's their second largest department in the federal government, is the Department of the Veterans Affairs. And I cannot emphasize, it's calcified. It is, they stonewall every inquiry, even from Congress they're having issues. So it's deep.
Yeah. Well, go ahead.
I'm David Macca, the Libertarian candidate for Congress in this district. Have you taken up another serious subject that 150,000 veterans have been disarmed by the communist government of Barack Obama? And as for Congress, Congress has oversight over all of it. Congress could shut down the Department of Veterans. The House of Representatives alone could defund the Department of Veterans Affairs as long as it's run by traitors who are attacking veterans. If 218 members of Congress had sufficient courage to do it, they don't yet.
No, great points, and you're actually absolutely right. Going back to the idea of making nonpartisan issues partisan issues, every time there has been some sort of whether it be, cut the funding. One thing we've as an organization has said, we're about fiscal responsibility. So a couple months ago, end of last year, there was a bill that went through that it was basically a wish list of everything that veterans organizations wanted. But it was a massive spending bill, and it actually created more problems than it did solutions. And so we were against it. Well, we're labeled as a veterans organization that's not supporting our veterans, right? And it's the same issue. Anytime there's an issue with, okay, we're going to cut funding here, or not just cut funding, but we're going to cut waste. Imagine that. You can cut funding in an appropriate way if it's cutting waste, right? But they get labeled as not supporting our veterans, or this is an anti-veteran, and it becomes a partisan issue. It becomes the Republicans blocked this veterans bill. It becomes this group blocked this veterans bill. It's a dangerous game we're playing when it comes to these issues being quote-unquote partisan. So he's exactly right. They have the power, but that's also an element to it, is that it's difficult to get things done when things are so partisan that even it looking like it's a spending cut for veterans, it's an anti-veteran, anti-military sentiment, or at least that's how the other side wants to persuade it.
He's got time for 4 more questions, and then.
Yes.
Yeah. I feel that you brought up a very good point that is systemic throughout the federal government, in that you have the federal employees unions and so forth that have set up their union contract and give their money to the party and the elected officials, so that you get this cycle of where we can't fire them, you get stonewalled, you have their protectors and the elected officials and so forth. And I believe that what you guys are trying to do is a first step in that process, but I believe we need to go further into the entire government to do that. And I was just curious as far as like support that you've gotten from the other side, particularly like with Sherrod Brown, and how has he been responsive to this?
Yeah, when going back to so this recent bill that passed, that was nearly unanimous. And so Sherrod Brown was a part of that. On the previous bill, the VA Management Accountability Bill, that was just about accountability, Rob Portman signed on, Senator Brown did not, and he talked his way around why that is. But no, you know, he wasn't originally on that until this other bill came
Because
through.
I believe the performance-based approach to what you guys are doing is something that needs to be through the government. And
Absolutely.
we can try to do that as people here, you know, go to both the senators and the congressmen to say, you know, make this good throughout the whole government.
Absolutely. And that's one of the things we said. Just to take a step back, it's the benefit of our organization. You know, we aren't your typical veterans organization, but we are a veterans organization. And so that comes with it some perks in the sense that people are more willing to get on board that maybe wouldn't have simply based on policy, if that makes sense. Now, people are absolutely for this accountability when it's related to our veterans. We don't want to see any more preventable veterans deaths. But what we've said is, if you take this as a case study a couple of years down the road, and you can be able to say, this is what happens when genuine accountability is brought into government. This is what happens when people are actually accountable for their actions. I mean, it's ridiculous that that's a revolutionary thought in government, but you're absolutely right. But you're absolutely right. You know, this is the first step, and we can look at that down the road. And this, if and when this passes and this goes through and this gets implemented, it sets precedents.
Any more questions? Go ahead.
I'd like to know what the name or number is associated with this reform bill you're proposing.
The supporting.
What you've been talking about,
Yeah.
what's the name or number of it?
I don't have a number for it. It is the Veterans Access to Health Care through Choice, Transparency, and Accountability Act.
That's a lot of words.
It is, but it's those three subjects we're talking about.
Two more questions.
I've been reading about this bill in the Wall Street Journal, and they just voted themselves a boatload of money. And I think that's why, and they want to build more veterans facilities and hire more government workers. And I think your accountability is going to get kicked to the sidelines. And that's why Sherrod Brown would vote for this, because they're getting more money.
votes. Yeah.
That's what it's all about. That's how they got it through. I don't think you're going to see what you think you're going to see at the end of it.
Absolutely. We are working very closely to make sure that the bill that comes out in the end is a bill that we can endorse. And if it's not, if it doesn't follow these principles that we've been talking about, we're not going to endorse it. We're going to have thousands of people across the country who will also not support it. So yeah. There are definitely some issues. In the House bill, it's a little wishy-washy on some of the accountability language. The Senate bill is a little bit stronger on that, so we're going to make sure that the final product is something that we can support.
I have something to say. My name is Donald Shuck. And about 6 weeks ago, Obama and company, they said this gentleman won the Congressional Medal of Honor. Won. There's no class there, period. It was awarded, but he earned it. And today, on the news after his speech and that there, a young man there lost his eyesight, and I don't know, they awarded him the Congressional Medal of Honor. Whether he's playing on the field of the military, or the civilians and that there, but he's a real bag of tricks, this guy. It makes me sick.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, on that note, we will. I'll step down. I'll be available afterwards for more questions, but I do appreciate the time and the.
I wanted to say, there's one way that the medical care in the VA looks good, and that's if you put it next to what we get in our prisons here in Ohio. I've been in the prison ministry for 40 years, and you want to talk about torture. How many death row pastors do I have here with me today? Raise your hand. Okay. You got 3 of them there with me. They can tell you what it's like. The medical care those guys in the prison system gets is horrendous, folks. I mean, it's what they make horror stories out of. But one real quick story, and this is a true story. This is an absolutely true story, Jeremiah. When I got out of the service, I had injured my knee prior to that, and they had told me that after I had gotten home to go and check into the VA facility. So I did that. I called them, and they made an appointment for me to come down. So when I came in there for my knee, they started x-raying my chest. And I said, this is my knee down here. Right here's my knee. Anyhow, they x-rayed my chest, but they just looked at my knee and never said anything. So I went back home and I figured, I'm back in again, But I got a call back a few weeks later. And this is a true story. This is this is for real. They asked me to come down, so I came down. And the nurse asked me, she said, do you have 3 nipples? Now, folks, now this is true. I said, this is my knee, here. And she said, I'm trying to be serious. I said, all right, you go first. Okay? And she was serious, all right. What happened, they had taken some x-rays